Which is more optimal, attacking twice during your turn or attacking once with advantage? I'm sure those of you out there who've played a lot of D&D or Pathfinder will say that attacking twice is generally always superior. But are there considerations we can take when designing a game to make both viable options? Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and today I'd like to talk about a fairly niche topic within the crunchy game design space, talking about action economies and balancing multi-attacks versus attacking with greater accuracy, and what sort of considerations we can take when we're making those kinds of games. So let's put on our crunchy design hats and let's walk through this problem, and I'll talk you through how I went about tackling this issue in Tales from Elsewhere. So in crunchy games, the amount of things you can do on your turn, your action economy as it's called, is a central part of the game's balance. Oftentimes, there is a lot of nuance to these systems. They'll use things like action points or different tiers of actions. There's a lot of different examples out there. For example, Pathfinder 2nd Edition uses a 3 action point structure, while a game like D&D 4th Edition used a standard action, move action, minor action, which D&D 5th Edition kind of iterated on with its action, move, and bonus action. Lots of different variation here. And the purpose of having these sort of different action economy structures are to motivate tactical choices, to give players interesting options on their turn on how they'd like to spend the few seconds that their turn represents. Do they use it for more offense, more defense, mobility? There's so many different ways that this can be tackled, but what they all share is this decision tree that it's supposed to represent. And there is that wide spectrum. There's no one right way to go about doing this, but each game is trying to facilitate the types of decisions they want the players to make. The simpler the action economy structure, the less the player needs to consider that structure during their turn, and they can spend their mental energy on possibly other decisions. So where you place your game's complexity on a given turn matters. Keeping it simpler on your action economy leaves more space in the brain to do other things. Having that action economy be crunchier or more detailed will then occupy more brain power during the turn. When I was first working on Tales from Elsewhere many years ago, I started out with a very 4th edition-like structure, a standard action, move action, minor action. I had just been playing a lot of games using that sort of structure, and I liked the tactical decision-making that represented within a given turn. But as I kept iterating on the game, I kept modifying this more and more because it ended up being the case that I didn't want a lot of nuance between those different choices on your turn. I didn't want different sized actions. Because when you have different sized actions, you start having to do more calculations between the different actions themselves. Is this a standard action, move action, or minor action? And you have to remember which of those any given ability or feature you have uses. And it started to not be where I wanted the players to be thinking, because at that point I had been adding in called shots into my game, which is another decision tree point per turn, right? It's more the player needed to calculate, and I wanted them to think more about the enemies and where they target them than I did about their own action economy sizes. After fiddling with it a bit, I decided that a player gets to do 2 different things on their turn, any 2 things as long as they're different, because I was concerned about players getting to do 2 of the same thing back to back and balance considerations around it. I was worried about being able to attack twice or move twice or what have you. So instead, if you have to do 2 different things, you could move and then attack. You could attack and then move. You could kick down a door and then shoot somebody, right? You had to do 2 different things. My hope was to incentivize more diversity in actions during the player's turn. And this 2 action structure is what allowed me to create the going all in system within the game. This is where instead of doing 2 different things, you can do 1 thing carefully, which lets you high roll, rolling with advantage. Roll 2d10 and keep the highest of the 2. That way, a player can choose to carefully do something like slowly aim their rifle before taking their shot rather than moving out of cover and shooting and then running back into cover. This was another tactical layer I got to add to the game that ended up playtesting really well. But when I took this system into playtesting, the players started to bump up against the edges of that structure. And that's because they had to remember what type of actions counted as what category. So shooting a gun and swinging a sword are both attacks, and you can't attack twice. But if you were dual wielding, maybe you could do 1 with each. what counted as a move, because you couldn't do the same move twice, right? You couldn't do the same category of action. And so it ended up having all of these incidental ramifications about how I categorized everything the player did. And there ended up having to be a discussion at the table on what counted as duplicative with a previous action. So I decided to just test it out with no restriction on which actions could be done twice or not. Just you can do any two actions on your turn. It could be the same action, different action, doesn't matter. And just like before, instead of doing two things, you could still do one thing, but high rolled, doing it more carefully, safely, or more consistently. But this led me back to that first question I posed at the start of the video. Attacking twice versus attacking with advantage. Why would anybody go all in on a skill test now when you could just do it twice? How is it going to handle that balance? So without any other context, right, it is always optimal to do the thing twice rather than once. And the reason for that we don't need to dig into, but basically you have the chance of getting two successes rather than just one. And you're still rolling twice in total, but in the first case of attacking twice, you have a chance of inflicting injury twice. And in the second case, you only have a chance of inflicting injury once. So mathematically, with no context, that's just true. The way I approached this was twofold. One was to add more consequences to failure, and two, to add resources that could be expended that would make attacking twice less optimal. So let me unpack how I approached both of them. Because TFE is an action horror game, it's meant to be a little grisly, a little gruesome, and the players aren't these wondrous heroes, they're regular people who can suffer great injury. So for example, if you're trying to vault across a chasm, rolling twice and keeping the higher is better than attempting to jump twice, because if you fail, you'll fall to potentially a gruesome death. Similarly, if you're trying to lift a wagon off of somebody as it tipped over and started crushing them, every time you fail, it could cause more injury to the person underneath, or strain you, or make it harder on subsequent turns. Rushing through the process has to come with disadvantages, setbacks, consequences to make the calculation on attempting twice versus just once actually worth considering. Think of it sort of not so much as fail forward, but fail backward, where each failure makes things harder for you going forward, right? The story continues, and that failure has consequence. Now, the player needs to judge whether it's worth getting two successes, working faster, or just attempting once, but with less chance of failure. And this extends into combat, because TFE makes heavy use of reactions. It's very much an active defense sort of game. For example, if a character pulls out a revolver and tries to shoot a bandit, that bandit can try to take cover from the gunfire. They can try to dive behind the table or the saloon bar, or behind a wall or a tree, to avoid getting shot. And why that matters is, if you try to shoot twice with each individual roll, that first shot could fail, and the bandit has dived behind cover, and you can't shoot them with the second shot because they're already behind cover. Whereas if you went all in on this shot and high rolled, it's more likely that you'll have beaten their reaction and gotten at least one hit in. That calculation starts to shift when, in combat, there are ramifications for failure as well. Additionally, it opens up design space for the monsters, for the threats, who can have additional ramifications for failing to get past their reactions. Maybe you swing at them with your sledgehammer and its reaction is to grab the sledgehammer and fling you across the map, into some rubble, causing injury. So high rolling in that situation is safer than trying to swing twice. It's giving the players a chance to gamble on getting more, but it places it in their hands. They choose this, and that high roll option starts to become more and more viable. The other rule structure that incentivizes high rolling over attacking twice is that firearms, which are ubiquitous in the Clockworld setting, have low ammo capacity and long reload times. For example, the 6-shooter, your classic Wild West revolver, has 6 shots in it, but takes a full turn basically to reload all of its shots. So if you run out of ammo, you end up losing a lot of efficiency having to stop and reload it. So being more careful with those shots can actually matter, especially if you only have one revolver and don't have spares already loaded. And this is exacerbated even more with the very powerful firearms like the coach gun or the buffalo rifle. The coach gun only has 2 shots in it, and you can try to shoot them both at once for extra damage, basically. Now, just shooting as frequently as you can with a coach gun will make you potentially do a lot of damage, but because it takes one action to reload each shell in the coach gun, it means that you could have a dead turn just trying to reload the thing if you weren't careful with your shots. Similarly, the Buffalo rifle has a single shot in it, and because of that, you probably want to be very careful and take your time and aim it before shooting. As part of this wing of game design, I also made it so the edges, the special abilities you can pick during character creation and advancement, start to incentivize going all in over attacking twice in certain circumstances. For example, the Mighty Swing edge lets you gain significantly deadlier strikes if you go all in swinging a big melee weapon like a sledgehammer or an axe. It's a huge damage boost, potentially, over swinging twice. And enemies in Tales from Elsewhere don't need to be hit a lot before dying. It's more important to deliver key, deadly blows than it is to chip away at them with weaker attacks. And when I put all this together and started playtesting it, I could tell it was the right decision. It's not always going to be the better choice to go all in, or it's not always going to be the better choice to attack twice. There is now branching and decisions to be made, and it's not a perfect 50-50 split, and certain builds will definitely favor one over the other, but in play, it ends up being really satisfying, and the players end up engaging with that system in a way that I had hoped my original draft would achieve. But you'll notice that how the action economy is structured was only part of the equation of the action economy balance. How everything else is built around that action economy and balanced in consideration of its details was almost more impactful than the action economy itself. The usage of abilities, the drawbacks for failure, the consequences and setbacks, all of these things ended up being the main balancing factor of that action economy, which is something you'll need to consider if you're building a crunchy game. And that's because no subsystem within a game exists as an island. They all connect in some way or are part of the same experience. So how you balance any individual system can't be done in a vacuum either. Everything is connected in a big web. And sometimes the best way to balance one system is actually to balance the things connecting to it. And the way I solve the problem isn't the only way to solve it. It's what works well for my game and my design goals, where the characters are fairly low powered and it's more about delivering key single hits than it is hitting multiple times. If you're building a game that incentivizes attacking many times, has large hit point pools, or very defensive characters, where the players have that heroic power, it becomes increasingly difficult to make rolling with advantage competitive with attacking twice. You have to layer in those consequences, drawbacks, ability usage is wasted in order to make that choice a substantive one. And you have to ask yourself, is that even a choice you'd like to give the players in the first place? Is that where you'd like them to spend their tactical mental energy? It's a question you have to answer for yourself in designing your crunchy game. And I'd love to hear what your action economy game plan is for your game if you're making something on the crunchy side. For rules-light games and narrative games, which I know I've been talking about a little bit more frequently on this channel, it doesn't really matter as much because that's not where the meat of the combat experience, if there is a combat experience at all, is supposed to reside. So if you're working on a crunchy game, let me know in the comments on how you've gone about designing your action economy and what balance considerations you've given. And if you want to continue that conversation, there's a link below down to the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server. And if how my game handles action economy is intriguing to you, our Kickstarter is currently live. There'll be a link down below for the Tales from Elsewhere Clockworld rulebook, the post-apocalyptic Weird West setting, which is our first book. Really hope you check it out and consider supporting us. And if not, that's all right. Maybe give a like and subscribe to this video, and I will catch you next week here on Tales from Elsewhere.